The Velvet Oak used to be our favorite spot, but tonight it felt like a generic courtroom. Across the table, Marcus could barely hide his smirk as he texted her under the tablecloth. He slid the divorce papers toward me, his eyes cold as ice, demanding I sign away 10 years of marriage for absolutely nothing. I picked up the pen, my hand steady. He thought he was discarding a broken woman, but he was only freeing me. My name is Elena, and at 32 years old, I was sitting in a booth at the Velvet Oak in Chicago, watching my marriage dissolve into the dregs of a cold cup of coffee. The restaurant was a cavern of polished mahogany and low, ambient jazz, the kind of place Marcus loved because it smelled of old money and exclusion. But tonight, the air between us was thick with a silence so sharp it could cut glass. Marcus did not even pretend to be present. Across the pristine white tablecloth, his attention was entirely consumed by the glowing screen of his phone. A small, cruel smile played on his lips as his thumbs flew across the glass. He was texting Tiffany. I knew it, and he knew that I knew. She was 22, allegedly the daughter of a real estate tycoon, and she was everything Marcus currently coveted: young, flashy, and supposedly wealthy. To him, I was just the outdated model he was eager to trade in. He finally set the phone down, though his eyes kept darting back to it as if afraid he might miss a notification. He slid a thick stack of legal documents across the table toward me. The paper made a dry, rasping sound against the linen. "Let's get this over with," Marcus said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "I need you to sign the transfer for the penthouse. The terms are generous, considering—" I looked down at the numbers. He was offering me $200,000 for my share of a property now valued at over $3 million. It was an insult, a final slap in the face after 10 years of supporting his climb up the corporate ladder. "Generous?" I asked softly, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands that I hid beneath the table. "You don't deserve the equity." "Elena," he scoffed, taking a sip of his wine. "I paid the mortgage. I built the connections. You just existed. 200,000 is enough for you to start over somewhere cheap. It is more than you brought into this marriage." I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized that the anger I expected to feel was missing. In its place was a vast, cold lake of indifference. I picked up the pen. I did not argue. I did not beg. I simply signed my name on the dotted line, severing the last financial tie that bound me to this man. "I am leaving Chicago," I said quietly, capping the pen. "I am moving to Montana." Marcus blinked, then let out a sharp, barking laugh that turned heads at the nearby tables. "Montana, you!" He shook his head, wiping tears of mirth from his eyes. "Oh, Elena, you really are a failure. You are going to go bury yourself in the middle of nowhere. Tiffany and I are looking at villas in the south of France. She knows how to live. You were born to be invisible." "Perhaps," I whispered. I reached into my purse and pulled out the platinum wedding band he had placed on my finger a decade ago. It felt heavy, burdened with 10 years of lies. I placed it gently on the table next to the signed papers. It clinked against the wood, a sound of finality. "Goodbye, Marcus." I stood up and walked away. I did not look back, but I could feel his gaze on my spine. I knew exactly what he was thinking. He was looking at my simple dress and my sensible shoes, pitying me. He believed I was walking out of these doors to rot in poverty, to wither away in the cold winds of the north while he ascended to royalty. As I pushed through the heavy oak doors and stepped out into the biting Chicago wind, the noise of the restaurant faded behind me. Inside, Marcus was surrounded by the clinking of expensive crystal and the hum of the elite. But I knew the truth. He was sitting there alone with his greed. He had won the penthouse and the trophy wife, but as the door swung shut, leaving him in the golden light, he was the one who was truly empty. I took a deep breath of the exhaust-filled city air. And for the first time in years, it tasted sweet. I was free. The silence in the penthouse was suffocating. I stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by cardboard boxes that contained 10 years of my life. It was strange how a decade of marriage could be reduced to a pile of inanimate objects. I picked up a crystal vase, a gift Marcus had given me for our 5th anniversary. It was heavy, cold, and utterly meaningless. I wrapped it in newspaper and shoved it into a box, feeling absolutely nothing. The memories attached to these things had not faded. They had simply evaporated, leaving behind a hollow ache where my heart used to be. I moved to the study to clear out the last of my personal documents, buried beneath a stack of old tax returns in the bottom drawer. My fingers brushed against worn, cracked leather. It was Aunt Clara's notebook. I pulled it out, the smell of dried lavender and old paper drifting up to meet me. Clara had passed away 3 years ago, leaving me a derelict property in Sapphire Valley, Montana. A place to heal, she had written in the margins in her shaky spiderweb handwriting. I had ignored it back then, too busy trying to be the perfect wife for a man who only wanted a trophy. Now, this notebook was not just a keepsake, it was my map. I ran my thumb over the coordinates scribbled on the first page. Suddenly, the front door beeped and slid open. My stomach tightened. I was supposed to be gone by noon, but packing had taken longer than expected. Marcus walked in, his stride arrogant and loud against the marble floor. He was not alone. Hanging on his arm was Tiffany. She was even younger in person, her skin glowing with expensive treatments, her eyes darting around the room not with wonder, but with calculation. She was appraising the furniture like an auctioneer. "Oh, you are still here," Marcus said, his voice dripping with annoyance. "We came to measure the windows for new drapes. Tiffany thinks the gray is too depressing." Tiffany giggled, a high, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. She let go of Marcus and wandered over to my open suitcase. She reached in with 2 manicured fingers and pinched the sleeve of my denim jacket, lifting it as if it were contaminated. "Oh, wow," Tiffany said, looking at me with wide, mock-innocent eyes. "Marcus, honey, did you see this? It looks well, like something from a discount bin. I can't believe you actually wore this in public." She twirled, the silk of her emerald dress catching the light. "I just love this new one you bought me. $5,000 well spent." Don't you think Marcus smirked, leaning against the doorframe? "Tiffany has taste. Elena, something you never quite acquired." I took the jacket from her hand and folded it neatly back into the suitcase. I did not feel the anger I expected. Instead, I felt a strange, distant pity for her. She had no idea she was just the next season's model, waiting to be replaced. I zipped up the suitcase and stood to my full height, looking her dead in the eye. "Enjoy the dress, Tiffany," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I just hope you can keep what you are trying so hard to steal." Tiffany's smile faltered for a second, but I was already walking past them. I did not look at Marcus. I walked out of the penthouse, the door clicking shut behind me with a finality that echoed in my bones. At the airport, the noise of the terminal washed over me. I stood near a trash can outside the departure gate and pulled my phone from my pocket. I popped the SIM card out. It held every text message, every contact, every toxic memory of my life in Chicago. I dropped it into the bin. It was a tiny piece of plastic, but letting it go felt like dropping an anchor that had been dragging me down for years. The flight to Montana was long. As the plane banked, I watched the sprawling gray grid of Chicago shrink beneath the clouds. The skyscrapers Marcus worshipped became nothing more than children's blocks, and then they vanished entirely. We turned west, flying toward the wild, open spine of the Rockies. I leaned my head against the cool window and closed my eyes. For the first time in a long time, the knot in my chest loosened. Marcus thought he had discarded me. thrown me away like unwanted trash. But as the city disappeared behind me, I realized the truth. I was not a victim being banished. I was a prisoner who had finally been released. Silent Pines was nothing like the glossy brochure photos of countryside retreats. When the battered taxi dropped me off at the end of the long, winding dirt road, I was greeted by a farmhouse that looked as if it were holding its breath, afraid to exhale lest it collapse entirely. The porch sagged under the weight of years, and the barn was a skeleton of gray wood against the vast, imposing backdrop of the Sapphire Valley Mountains. But as I stepped out, the air hit me crisp, clean, and smelling of pine resin and wet earth. It filled my lungs in a way the recycled air of Chicago never could. I walked out into the overgrown fields. The weeds were waist-high, a chaotic sea of green and brown. But when I knelt and dug my fingers into the ground, the soil was dark, crumbly, and cool. It was alive. My Aunt Clara had left me a wreck, but she had also left me a foundation. It was on the third day, while clearing out a storm cellar that had been padlocked for decades, that I found the real inheritance. Hidden behind stacks of rusted tools were wooden crates, lined with straw and preserved in the cool, dark air. Inside were thousands of bulbs. They looked like dry onions to the untrained eye, but the label pinned to the crate made my heart stop. Crocus sativus heritage strain, 1950. Aunt Clara had not just been a gardener, she had been a guardian of a rare, ancient variety of saffron, the most expensive spice in the world, long thought to be lost to commercial hybrids. I did not hire a crew. I did not call a contractor. I pulled on a pair of heavy work gloves, tied my hair back, and went to work. For the first time in my life, my body ached not from the tension of walking on eggshells around Marcus, but from honest, hard labor. I cleared brush until my hands blistered and then calloused over. My pale, office-bleached skin turned a deep, golden bronze, and the shadows under my eyes vanished, replaced by a spark of determination I had not seen since I was a child. I needed help with the water, though that was how I met Lucas. He rolled up in a truck that sounded like a dying thunderstorm, a local agricultural specialist with dirt under his fingernails and eyes that crinkled when he squinted at the sun. He walked the lines of the field with me, inspecting the old irrigation pipes I was trying to salvage. You have got a serious challenge here. Elena, Lucas said, kicking a rusted valve. He looked at me, then at the crates of bulbs I had shown him. But these corms, if they are viable, if we can get water to them, you are not just planting flowers. You are sitting on a red gold mine. This specific strain hasn't been seen in this valley for 50 years. Can we save them? I asked, wiping sweat from my forehead. We can try, he replied, a slow smile spreading across his face. But it will take everything you have got. While I was knee-deep in mud, learning the rhythm of the seasons, the world I left behind was spiraling into a different kind of chaos. Sarah, my only link to Chicago, told me over the phone that Marcus was beginning to crack. The wedding preparations were becoming a financial black hole. Tiffany was demanding imported orchids and a custom-made glass dance floor, burning through Marcus's liquidity like a wildfire. I could almost hear Tiffany's voice, dripping with false reassurance as she manipulated him. Marcus, baby, stop worrying about the bills, she would say, brushing imaginary dust off his shoulder. My inheritance from the estate in Europe is clearing probate next week. It is millions of dollars. Just borrow what we need for now. You trust me, don't you? We have to show the world who we are. And Marcus, blinded by his desperate need to maintain his image, believed her. He was taking out high-interest loans, leveraging the company, digging a pit so deep he would never climb out. But his anxiety felt a million miles away from me. I had found joy in things I used to ignore. I loved the smell of the air right before a storm broke over the mountains. I loved the sound of the meadowlarks singing in the morning, a natural symphony that replaced the honking of taxis and the shrill ringing of phones. The silence of the valley was not empty. It was full of peace. 6 weeks after planting, I walked out to the fields at dawn with a mug of coffee in my hand. The mist was clinging to the ground, swirling around my boots. I looked down at the dark furrows of earth Lucas and I had turned. There, piercing through the soil, was a tiny, vibrant spike of green. Then another, and another. I dropped to my knees, not caring about the damp earth soaking my jeans. I brushed a thumb over the delicate shoot. It was fragile, barely an inch tall, but it had pushed through the weight of the dark earth to find the sun. It was the first sign of the saffron harvest. It was the first sign of my new life. Marcus had buried me, thinking I would rot, but he had forgotten that I was a seed, and now I was blooming. My old life as a corporate wife had taught me one valuable lesson: how to sell a dream. I took the raw, crimson threads of saffron we harvested from the dark earth of silent pines, and I wrapped them in a narrative as rich as their flavor. I launched Sapphire Gold not just as a spice, but as an experience. I designed the packaging myself late at night, using sleek, minimalist glass jars that showcased the vivid red filaments like precious jewels. I built a website that told the story of the lost heritage strain, the mountain air, and the purity of the soil. The response was immediate, but the real breakthrough came from a sector I had never anticipated. A representative from Zenith Pharmaceuticals, a global giant in medical research, flew out to Montana personally. He sat in my modest kitchen, staring at a lab report with wide eyes. "Mrs. Vance," he said, tapping the paper, "do you have any idea what you are growing out there? The concentration of safranal and crocin in your harvest it is off the charts. We have not seen purity levels like this in decades. We want to buy everything, the entire harvest, and we want an exclusive contract for the next 5 years." I didn't blink. I took a sip of my tea and looked at him. "You want exclusivity that will cost a premium. I want $200 per gram, and I want a 10% royalty on any supplements you derive from my strain." He hesitated for only a second before extending his hand. Done. Just like that, the first wire transfer hit my account. It was 7 figures. $1,500,000, deposited into the bank account of a woman who was wearing muddy boots and a flannel shirt. I was a millionaire. I stared at the screen, waiting for the thrill of vanity to hit me. But it never came. I did not run out to buy a sports car or designer handbags. I simply paid off the farm's back taxes, bought Lucas a new state-of-the-art tractor he had been eyeing, and put the rest into a high-yield savings account. Meanwhile, in the glass towers of Chicago, Marcus was playing a dangerous game of smoke and mirrors. Sarah told me that global tech was hemorrhaging money. Investors were pulling out, spooked by rumors of his reckless spending. Marcus was terrified. So he did what he always did. He doubled down on the lie. He was banking everything on the wedding. He needed it to be the social event of the decade, a dazzling display of wealth that would convince the world he was still a king. "You won't believe what they did," Sarah said over the phone one evening, her voice trembling with indignation. "They sent a wedding invitation to the penthouse, to your old address. Elena, they knew you wouldn't get it. They just wanted the doorman to see it and return it, like rubbing salt in a wound." I chuckled, leaning back in my chair as I looked over the blueprints for my next project. Let them play their games. "Sarah, did the invitation have gold leaf? Yes. And it was scented. It smells like desperate perfume. Marcus is posting about it everywhere. #PowerCouple. It makes me want to vomit." "Let him post," I said, tracing a line on the map spread out before me. "I have bigger things to worry about." "Bigger than a wedding?" Sarah asked. "Much bigger. I am closing a deal tomorrow. I am buying the old Timberline Eco Lodge down the valley. I am going to turn it into a wellness retreat centered around the saffron farm. I am not just selling a product anymore. Sarah, I am building an empire. The contrast was almost poetic. Marcus was drowning in debt, screaming for attention, plastering his fake happiness on every screen he could find to hide the rotting foundation of his life. I was sitting in silence, surrounded by the quiet majesty of the mountains, quietly accumulating real wealth and building something that would last. He was a hollow man in a borrowed suit, and I was the owner of the land he walked on. I hung up the phone and looked out the window. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold, colors that no money in Chicago could ever buy. The wedding was scheduled to take place at the Grand Palace, the most ostentatious hotel in Chicago. It was the kind of venue that dripped with crystal chandeliers and gold leaf, a place designed to make the insecure feel important and the wealthy feel validated. Even from 2,000 miles away in Montana, I could smell the pretension through the screen of my phone. Sarah had arrived early, acting as my spy behind enemy lines. She video called me while hiding behind a massive floral arrangement in the lobby. "Elena, you have to see this to believe it," Sarah whispered, panning her camera around the ballroom. "It looks like Versailles threw up in here. I heard the flower budget alone was $60,000. "It is a lot of money for a show," I replied, sipping my tea and watching the chaos unfold on my small screen. What Sarah did not know then, but what the world would soon find out, was exactly how that bill was being paid. Marcus had not just dipped into his savings, he had mortgaged the soul of his company. To satisfy Tiffany's demand for a wedding dress hand-stitched with crushed diamonds and a menu flown in exclusively from France, Marcus had quietly signed over the remaining assets of Global Tech as collateral. I could imagine the scene in the waiting room perfectly. Marcus's parents, two people who had worked honest jobs their whole lives, were sitting in the corner, looking terrified. Marcus, his mother likely said, clutching her purse. "Are you sure about this? The cost? It is astronomical. We are worried." "Mom, stop." Marcus would have snapped, adjusting his silk tie with trembling hands. "You do not understand business. Tiffany is a Rochefort. Her family owns half of Europe. Once we are married, her dowry will wipe out these debts in seconds. This is an investment." He was deluding himself. The tragic irony, which sat at the center of this farce like a rotting core, was that Tiffany was just as broke as he was. She was not a European heiress. She was a professional grifter from Ohio with a mountain of credit card debt and a fake accent she practiced in the mirror. She looked at Marcus and saw a golden ticket to pay off her loans. Marcus looked at Tiffany and saw a lifeboat for his sinking company. They were two predators stalking each other in a circle, both believing they were about to feast, unaware they were both starving. Sarah moved her phone, capturing a glimpse of the bride and groom near the entrance of the ballroom. They were not smiling. They were arguing in hushed, aggressive whispers. "I told you I wanted the vintage Dom Perignon," Tiffany hissed, her face contorted in ugly rage. "This swill is from 2015. Do you want my cousins from Paris to laugh at us?" Marcus ran a hand through his hair, sweat visible on his forehead even through the low-resolution video. "Babe," the supplier ran out. It is fine. No one will notice." "I will notice," Tiffany shrieked, then lowered her voice as a waiter walked by. "You said you could afford the best. Are you being cheap with me?" "Marcus, because if you are—" "I am not being cheap," Marcus shot back, his voice cracking. "I just spent $10,000 on your shoes, just get in there and smile." It was the perfect comedy of errors. There was absolutely no love between them. There was only calculation. They walked toward the altar not as soulmates, but as accomplices in a mutual fraud, each terrified that the other would discover the truth before the rings were exchanged. "Oh, this is going to be good," Sarah said, adjusting her camera angle as the guests began to file in. "I have never seen a groom look so much like he is walking to the gallows. I am going to live stream the whole thing for you. Thanks, Sarah, I said, feeling a strange sense of detachment. But do not worry about me. I am just watching the season finale of a show I stopped caring about a long time ago. The tension in the ballroom was palpable. Every time a cork popped, Marcus jumped, likely terrified it was a process server or a creditor coming to collect. He was holding his breath, praying he could make it through the next 3 hours without his house of cards collapsing. He had no idea that the wind was already blowing. Through the high-definition lens of Sarah's camera, the breakdown was already visible before the ceremony even began. Marcus stood at the head of the aisle, encased in a tuxedo that cost more than my first car, but he looked like a man facing a firing squad rather than a priest. Sweat was beading on his upper lip, and every few seconds, his hand would twitch toward his pocket where his phone was vibrating. I knew that rhythm. It was not well-wishers sending congratulations. It was the relentless, buzzing panic of creditors who had realized the checks were going to bounce. Tiffany made her entrance not with grace, but with a tidal wave of entitlement. She looked stunning in the diamond-encrusted gown, I had to admit, but the illusion shattered the moment a waiter accidentally stepped too close to her train. "You idiot!" Tiffany shrieked, her voice cutting through the string quartet's melody like a serrated knife. "Watch where you are stepping. This dress costs more than your entire life." She shoved the poor man aside, her face twisted in a snarl that the heavy makeup could not hide. The guests shifted uncomfortably, but no one said a word. The room was packed with 500 people, yet I doubt 5 of them actually cared about the couple. These were business partners, potential investors, and industry rivals Marcus was desperate to impress. The air didn't smell of romance. It reeked of desperation and transactional greed. Then, the heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open, not for the bride, but for a ghost. A hush swept across the room, starting from the back and rolling forward like a wave. Standing in the archway was a man who did not need an introduction in Chicago or anywhere else in the financial world. It was Arthur Sterling. He was a legend, an old-money billionaire with a portfolio worth tens of billions and a reputation for being unreachable. Marcus's eyes went wide. I saw his posture change instantly. The fear evaporated, replaced by a surge of arrogant adrenaline. He puffed out his chest, a smug grin spreading across his face. He leaned over to his best man. "I told you," Marcus whispered loud enough for the microphone to pick up a faint echo. "I told you. I have arrived. Sterling is here for me." He truly believed it, in his delusional narcissism. Marcus thought his reputation had grown so large that Arthur Sterling had decided to crash his wedding just to pay respects. The reality, of course, was far simpler. Arthur looked confused, glancing at a piece of paper in his hand, likely having walked into the wrong ballroom or perhaps stopping by out of sheer curiosity after seeing the gaudy signage in the lobby. But while Marcus was preening like a peacock, Tiffany was reacting like a cornered rat. When she saw the silver-haired man in the doorway, the blood drained from her face so fast she looked like a corpse. She stumbled back, gripping the arm of a bridesmaid so hard the girl winced. "No," Tiffany breathed, her voice barely a squeak. It cannot be him." She tried to turn away, to hide behind the massive floral arch, but it was too late. Arthur Sterling stepped into the room. The atmosphere transformed instantly. The guests, who had been looking at their watches and checking their phones, were now standing on their toes, craning their necks. They looked from Arthur to Marcus, and I could see the calculation in their eyes. If Arthur Sterling was here, then Marcus must be the real deal. "Look at that," Sarah whispered into the live stream, panning the camera back to Marcus's triumphant face. "He thinks he just won the lottery. He has no idea he just opened the door to the executioner." The silence in the hall was absolute, heavy with false admiration and pending doom. Marcus took a step forward, ready to welcome his idol, completely oblivious to the fact that his bride was trembling in terror behind him. The storm had officially arrived. Marcus practically sprinted down the short staircase from the altar, his hand extended like a desperate salesman closing the deal of a lifetime. Through the screen of Sarah's phone, I watched him intercept Arthur Sterling before the billionaire could take another step. Marcus was beaming, radiating a frantic energy that was painful to watch. Mr. Sterling. What an absolute honor, Marcus said, his voice trembling slightly with excitement. I am Marcus Vance, CEO of Global Tech, and this is my stunning bride, Tiffany. She is the sole heiress to the Rochefort Group in France. I am sure you move in the same circles. Tiffany arrived at Marcus's side a second later, but she looked less like a bride and more like a convict facing a judge. She refused to make eye contact with Arthur, her gaze fixed on the floor. Arthur Sterling did not shake Marcus's hand. He stood perfectly still, his steel-gray eyes locking onto Tiffany with the precision of a laser. He tilted his head slightly, studying her face as if trying to recall a mugshot. Rochefort, Arthur repeated, the word rolling off his tongue with skepticism. He frowned, a deep crease appearing between his brows. That is, curious. My firm just completed the acquisition of the Rochefort estate's remaining assets last month. Marcus blinked, his smile faltering. Acquisition, you mean? A merger. Arthur let out a short, dry chuckle that held no humor. Hardly. It was a liquidation sale. The Rochefort family filed for bankruptcy 5 years ago. They lost the chateaus, the vineyards, everything. Last I heard, the daughter was working as a hostess in a nightclub in Lyon. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus froze, his hand still half extended in midair. He looked at Arthur, then slowly turned his head to look at Tiffany. Bankrupt, Marcus whispered, the color draining from his cheeks. But, Tiffany said. Tiffany let out a high-pitched, nervous laugh that sounded like glass breaking. She grabbed Marcus's arm, her fingernails digging into his tuxedo jacket. Oh, Marcus, do not listen to him, she said, her voice shrill and breathless. Mr. Sterling must be thinking of a different branch of the family. You know how complicated French lineage can be. Honey, we have to go greet the senator at table 4. Come on. Right now. She tried to pull him away, but Marcus was planted like a statue. I could see the sweat breaking through the heavy foundation on Tiffany's face. It was trickling down her neck, staining the collar of her astronomically expensive dress. Sitting just 2 tables away, Sarah took a sip of her champagne and smiled. She typed a message on her phone. And a second later, my screen lit up. It has started. Marcus allowed Tiffany to drag him a few steps away. But the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing fast. As soon as Tiffany turned her back to yell at a photographer, Marcus slipped his phone out of his pocket. For the entire duration of their relationship, he had been too lazy, too trusting, or perhaps too blinded by greed to do a simple background check. He had just accepted her stories because they fed his ego. Now, his thumbs flew across the screen. I could guess exactly what he was typing Rochefort family bankruptcy France. His eyes widened as he scrolled. He stopped walking. He looked up from the screen to the back of Tiffany's head, and for the first time, there was no adoration in his gaze. There was only the cold, hard dawn of realization. Around them, the atmosphere in the ballroom began to curdle. The guests at the front tables had heard Arthur's comment. The whisper started as a ripple and turned into a wave. Did you hear that a woman in a red dress whispered to her husband? Sterling said she is broke. Bankruptcy, another man muttered. I thought Marcus said her dowry was funding the expansion. The air grew heavy and suffocating. It was no longer a celebration. It was a crime scene investigation. Marcus shoved his phone back into his pocket, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might shatter. He looked back at Arthur Sterling, who was now calmly taking a seat at a VIP table he had not even been assigned to, watching the chaos he had ignited with the detached interest of a scientist observing a lab rat. The trap had snapped shut. The speeches began just as the main course was being cleared. Marcus took the stage, tapping the microphone with a ring-clad finger to silence the murmur of the crowd. Through the pixelated feed on my phone, I could see the desperate gleam in his eyes. He had managed to suppress his doubts about Tiffany for the moment, burying them under a layer of bravado. He needed this performance to work. He needed the investors in the room to believe that he was still the king of Chicago. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus boomed, his voice echoing off the high, gilded ceilings. "Thank you for joining us on this momentous occasion. Today is not just about the union of two hearts. It is about the union of power, of legacy, and of a shared vision for the future. Tiffany and I, we are just getting started." He paused for applause, but the clapping was polite and sparse. He cleared his throat, his smile tightening. "My wife, my beautiful wife, represents the kind of class and sophistication that I have always strived for, unlike my past, which was, let's just say, limited in its ambition. Tiffany pushes me to be greater." He was taking a dig at me. Even on his wedding day, he couldn't resist. I took a sip of my tea, feeling nothing but a dull amusement. Suddenly, a chair scraped loudly against the floor. Arthur Sterling stood up. The sound of his movement was enough to silence the room instantly. Marcus stopped mid-sentence, his eyes lighting up. This was it. This was the endorsement he had been praying for. If Arthur Sterling gave a toast, the banks would extend his credit lines by morning. "Mr. Sterling," Marcus said, breathless. "Please, sir, would you do us the honor?" He practically ran to the edge of the stage to hand the microphone down to the billionaire. Marcus looked around the room, beaming, silently screaming. "See, he is here for me." Arthur took the microphone. He did not smile. He turned to face the crowd, his posture commanding absolute attention. "I apologize for the interruption," Arthur said, his voice deep and gravelly. "And I apologize for arriving unannounced. But my time is limited, and I was told I might find someone important here. I came to this hall tonight for one reason only. I am looking for Mrs. Elena Vance." The name hung in the air like a thunderclap. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, a ripple of confused whispering broke out. Marcus looked as if he had been slapped. His smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer bewilderment and disgust. He snatched the microphone back, forgetting all etiquette. Elena Marcus laughed, a harsh, incredulous sound. "Mr. Sterling, you must be joking. Why on earth would you be looking for her? She is nobody. She is a bitter, small-minded woman living in a shack in the middle of nowhere. She does not have the standing to be in the same room as you." Arthur Sterling stepped up onto the stage. He took the microphone back from Marcus with a firm, deliberate motion. He looked Marcus dead in the eye, and then he turned to the camera crews that were broadcasting the event to the giant screens in the hall. "A nobody?" Arthur asked, his voice dripping with icy amusement. "That is fascinating, because as of 9 o'clock this morning, Mrs. Vance is the primary supplier for my pharmaceutical division, and more importantly, the company she founded, Sapphire Gold, was just independently valued at $50 million. The number hit the room like a physical blow. $50 million. I watched the screen as the color drained out of Marcus's face. It didn't just fade, it vanished, leaving him looking like a wax figure melting under the lights. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. 50, Marcus stammered, his voice barely a whisper. That is impossible. She grows flowers. She grows the purest pharmaceutical-grade saffron on the planet. Arthur continued, twisting the knife, and she owns the land, the patents, and the distribution rights 100%. She is not just a partner, Marcus. She is a tycoon. The glass of red wine in Marcus's hand slipped. It seemed to fall in slow motion. It hit the white marble of the stage with a shattering crash, spraying crimson liquid all over his polished shoes and the hem of Tiffany's dress. But Marcus did not move. He did not look down. He just stared at Arthur Sterling, his eyes wide and hollow, as the reality of what he had thrown away crashed down on him with the weight of a collapsing building. He had traded a diamond for a piece of glass, and now, the whole world knew it. The live stream on my phone was shaking, likely because Sarah was laughing too hard to hold the camera steady. On the screen, the tragedy of my former marriage was mutating into a farce of epic proportions. Arthur Sterling, having dropped the bomb that obliterated Marcus's ego, was not done yet. He held the microphone with the casual ease of an executioner who enjoyed his work. "I was told," Arthur said, his voice smooth but cutting, "that you discarded Mrs. Vance because you found her to be, how did you phrase it, unambitious poor." He shook his head slowly, looking at Marcus with a mixture of pity and disdain. To walk away from a woman of her caliber for a delusion of grandeur. "Mr. Vance, you are, without a doubt, the man with the worst vision I have ever encountered in my 80 years of business. It was the final straw," Marcus snapped. The veneer of the successful CEO vanished, revealing the cornered, desperate animal underneath. He whipped his head around to face Tiffany. His eyes were bulging, and the veins in his neck stood out like cords. "You," Marcus hissed, pointing a trembling finger at her. "You told me you were an heiress." "You told me the transfer was coming next week. Why did he say your family is bankrupt?" Tiffany backed away, her heels catching on the layers of her diamond-studded dress. She looked around at the hundreds of guests, all of whom had their phones raised, recording her humiliation. Panic turned to aggression. She decided that if she was going down, she was taking him with her. "Do not look at me like that," Tiffany screamed, her voice cracking. "You want to talk about money. What about you? Marcus, you walk around like you own the city, but your platinum credit card was declined yesterday when the florist tried to charge it for $500. $500. A collective gasp swept through the room. "That was a bank error," Marcus roared, stepping toward her. "It was insufficient funds," Tiffany shrieked back, her face red and distorted. "You are broke. You have been borrowing money from everyone in town to pay for this circus just to impress people who do not even like you." "I did it for the merger," Marcus yelled, spitting as he spoke. "Because you said your inheritance would clear my debts, I married you for the capital. You are nothing but a lying fraud, and I married you because I thought you were a tech mogul." Tiffany grabbed her bouquet and hurled it at him. It hit him square in the chest, petals exploding everywhere. "You are just a broke loser in a rented tuxedo." The truth hung in the air, naked and ugly. They had confessed their sins to the entire world. In the front row, Marcus's mother let out a soft, strangled moan. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and she collapsed sideways. His father tried to catch her, but his knees gave way, and they both slumped to the floor in a dead faint. But Marcus did not even look at them. The chaos escalated in a heartbeat. 3 men in dark, ill-fitting suits who had been standing near the catering station suddenly surged forward. They were not guests. They were the loan sharks Marcus had been dodging for weeks. Seeing the confession live on stage, they realized their investment was evaporating. Vance, one of the men, shouted, vaulting onto the stage and grabbing Marcus by the lapels. "Where is my money?" The wedding had turned into a riot. Guests were scrambling over chairs to get a better view or to flee the violence. Amidst the screaming and the shoving, Arthur Sterling simply shook his head. He placed the microphone gently on a table, adjusted his silk tie, and turned his back on the mayhem. He walked down the stairs and through the crowd with a calm, steady stride, leaving the fire he had ignited to burn itself out. The police arrived at the Grand Palace not to escort a VIP, but to break up a brawl. The wedding of the century ended with sirens wailing against the night sky. Sarah told me later that Marcus was dragged out of the ballroom in handcuffs, his tuxedo torn at the shoulder where one of the loan sharks had grabbed him. Tiffany was right behind him, screaming at an officer, her diamond-encrusted dress stained with red wine and humiliation. They were shoved into the back of separate squad cars, leaving behind a wreckage of broken glass and shattered reputations. By midnight, the hashtag scam wedding of the century was trending globally. The internet is a ruthless judge, and the verdict was swift. The board of directors at Global Tech convened an emergency meeting at 3 a.m. and filed for immediate bankruptcy to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of their CEO. Marcus went from a rising star to a national punchline in the span of 4 hours. Tiffany fared no better. Once her name hit the news, the floodgates opened. It turned out Marcus wasn't her first victim. She was a serial grifter with a trail of maxed-out credit cards and deceived men across 3 different states. Lawsuits began to pile up on her doorstep like snowdrifts. She vanished within days, likely skipping town to find a new identity in a city where no one watched the news. Forced to live in the shadows like a fugitive, Marcus lost everything. The bank foreclosed on the penthouse before the week was out. His luxury car was repossessed. He was left with nothing but the clothes on his back and the crushing weight of his own stupidity, in the silence of a friend's spare room, sleeping on a lumpy couch. The reality finally hit him. He realized that in his desperate chase for fool's gold, he had thrown away the only real thing he ever had. He tried to call me. He dialed my old number over and over, begging for a second chance, for forgiveness, for anything. But that phone was sitting at the bottom of a recycling bin at O'Hare Airport, silent and dead. 2,000 miles away. The sun was dipping below the peaks of the Sapphire Mountains, painting the sky in strokes of burnt orange and deep violet. I sat on the porch of Silent Pines, wrapping my hands around a warm ceramic mug. The steam rising from the tea carried the rich, earthy scent of saffron, my saffron. My phone buzzed on the wooden railing. It was a message from Sarah. "You have to watch the full footage," she wrote. "It is justice. Elena, pure karma." Attached was a video file of the chaos at the wedding. I tapped the screen and watched for a few seconds. I saw Marcus's terrified face. I heard Tiffany's shrieking voice, and I saw the ruin of a life that used to be mine. I waited for a surge of vindication. I waited to feel a rush of pleasure at his suffering, but it never came. I felt absolutely nothing, no anger, no pity, no joy, just a profound, quiet stillness. They were strangers to me now, characters in a bad movie I had walked out of a long time ago. I turned off the screen and set the phone face down on the table. I stood up and walked out into the garden, my boots crunching softly on the gravel. The air was cool and crisp, filling my lungs with the oxygen of freedom. I looked out over the valley, where thousands of purple flowers were closing their petals for the night, guarding the red gold inside. The chapter was closed. The book was finished. I smiled, not at the past, but at the horizon. My life was finally my own, and it was going to be magnificent. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please comment below where you are listening from. I would love to hear your thoughts and connect with you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel Lily Revenge Stories, like the video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach more people.